When your friends call, you'd better call them back, fast. Because missing that one call from John might mean missing a moment with someone who helped shape comedy history. He was part of one of the most influential comedy shows ever created, co-wrote a film that defined an entire decade, and yet somehow, over time, his name slipped quietly out of the spotlight. So what really happened to Dan Aykroyd, the unexpected talent from Ottawa who once seemed impossible to ignore? Born on July 1, 1952, Canada Day, no less, in Ottawa, Ontario, Aykroyd's origins feel almost symbolic. He has always carried that distinctly Canadian identity with quiet pride. His father, Peter Aykroyd, wasn't just an engineer but also a policy advisor to Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, while his mother, Lorraine, came from a French-Canadian background and worked as a secretary. It was a grounded, middle-class upbringing. Hardly the kind of background you'd expect for someone who would one day don a pork pie hat and hunt ghosts on screen. But even early on, there were signs he wasn't quite like everyone else. Aykroyd was born with webbed toes on one foot, and his eyes, one blue, one green, gave him a striking, almost otherworldly look. By the age of 12, he had been diagnosed with Tourette syndrome, a challenge he managed through therapy. These quirks, rather than holding him back, became part of the unique energy and perspective that would later fuel his creativity, hinting that this ordinary kid from Ottawa was anything but ordinary. In the early 1980s, encouraged by his wife to seek professional insight, Dan Aykroyd came to believe that he was also on the autism spectrum, specifically with Asperger's. He has spoken candidly about how this way of experiencing the world, marked by intense focus, pattern recognition, and deep, almost obsessive interests, didn't just define his personality, but became the engine behind his creativity. What some might see as limitations, he quietly transformed into fuel for imagination. And those fascinations weren't passing phases, they were lifelong fixations. The paranormal, blues music, law enforcement, UFOs, these weren't just hobbies, they were part of his identity. As a teenager in Ottawa, he attended St. Pius X and St. Patrick's High School, originally planning to enter the Catholic priesthood. 4 years, that path seemed certain, and he didn't seriously question it until around the age of 17. Spirituality wasn't just personal, it was embedded in his family's history. His great-grandfather, a dentist with a deep interest in mysticism, even corresponded with Arthur Conan Doyle about spiritualism and was involved with the Lily Dale Society. His grandfather, on the other hand, served in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, representing discipline and structure. These influences weren't just stories passed down, they were building blocks. So when Aykroyd finally turned away from the priesthood, it wasn't into something random, it was into comedy, a space where all those strange, intense, and deeply rooted influences could come alive in ways no one expected. The people around Dan Aykroyd didn't need much convincing, they recognized early on that he was exactly where he needed to be. In 1969, he enrolled at Carleton University in Ottawa, studying criminology and sociology, but the pull of something less conventional proved stronger, and he left before finishing his degree. Instead, he immersed himself in real-world experiences, managing an after-hours speakeasy known as Club 505 in Toronto and performing in various nightclubs across Canada. It was there, far from any classroom, that he began sharpening a raw, instinctive comedic edge that couldn't be taught. Music, especially the blues, became another powerful influence. At a venue called Le Hibou, he spent years listening to some of the era's greatest artists, James Cotton, Otis Spann, Pinetop Perkins, and Muddy Waters. One unforgettable night, when the regular drummer stepped away, Aykroyd found himself sitting in behind Muddy Waters. Told simply to keep the beat going, he did, and afterward, Waters told him he made him feel good. Moments like that weren't just exciting, they stayed with you, shaping confidence in ways nothing else could. Then came the turning point. In 1973, Aykroyd joined the Toronto branch of the Second City, the legendary Chicago-based improv troupe known for producing some of North America's sharpest comedic minds. It was here that everything began to accelerate. Surrounded by rising talents like Bill Murray, John Candy, and Gilda Radner, Aykroyd found himself in the perfect environment, one that didn't just nurture his uniqueness, but turned it into something unforgettable. From early on, Dan Aykroyd showed a relentless drive to stay in motion. He took on work as a television announcer while continuing to run nightclubs, always finding ways to stay busy, to build, to create. There was a clear sense that he refused to waste time. Every hour had a purpose, every opportunity a direction. But the most pivotal moment in his early career came when he met a rising comedian from Chicago, John Belushi. Belushi had come to Toronto scouting talent for the National Lampoon Radio Hour, and that's where he discovered Aykroyd. What followed wasn't just a professional partnership, it was something deeper, almost electric. Belushi was explosive, physical, unpredictable, a force of nature on stage. Aykroyd, by contrast, was sharp, rapid-fire, and intensely detail-oriented, with a near-encyclopedic mind. Their differences didn't clash, they fused. Together, they formed a rare kind of comedic duo, one where each was brilliant in his own right, but even more compelling together, volatile, dynamic, and impossible to ignore. It was that unique chemistry that set the stage for what came next. In 1975, as Lorne Michaels was assembling a brand-new late-night sketch show for NBC, he chose Aykroyd as part of the original cast, marking the beginning of a cultural shift that would soon redefine comedy on television. Saturday Night Live premiered on October 11, 1975, with Dan Aykroyd as the youngest member of the group, famously known as the not-ready-for-prime-time players. Interestingly, he hadn't even started as a performer. He was initially hired as a writer, earning just $278 a week. But before the show ever went on air, his talent pushed him in front of the camera. Over 4 seasons, from 1975 to 1979, he quickly proved himself to be one of the most technically skilled performers the show had ever seen. He had a rare precision. As an impressionist, he was sharp, fearless, and exact, bringing figures like Jimmy Carter, Richard Nixon, Julia Child, Tom Snyder, and Rod Serling to life with uncanny accuracy and biting humor. Beyond impressions, he built characters that audiences didn't just laugh at, they remembered. There was Beldar, the odd patriarch of the Coneheads, the unforgettable wild and crazy guy persona alongside Steve Martin, and perhaps most iconic of all, Elwood Blues, the quiet, harmonica-playing half of the Blues Brothers. His talent didn't go unnoticed by his peers. When Eric Idle guest hosted, he famously remarked that Aykroyd was the only cast member he believed could have been part of Monty Python. That wasn't casual praise, it was recognition of something rare. Aykroyd possessed a kind of technical intensity, a speed and depth in transforming into characters that made even the strangest sketches feel completely real, as if every role he played had always existed, he was simply revealing it. What began as a simple sketch soon took on a life of its own. The Blues Brothers, Dan Aykroyd as Elwood and John Belushi as Jake, quickly evolved into something far bigger than anyone had expected. Backed by a lineup of real R&B legends like Steve Cropper, Donald Duck Dunn, and Lou Marini, the act moved beyond comedy into legitimate music. In 1978, they released the live album Briefcase Full of Blues, which went on to sell over 3.5 million copies, becoming one of the best-selling blues albums of all time. Saturday Night Live may have made them famous, but the music proved they were the real thing. By 1977, Aykroyd's talent had already been formally recognized. He won an Emmy Award for Outstanding Writing for a Variety Series for his work on SNL. Decades later, in 2015, Rolling Stone ranked him 5th among all SNL cast members in history, placing him just behind John Belushi, Eddie Murphy, Tina Fey, and Mike Myers. What stood out most in that assessment was a simple truth. Of all the original greats, Aykroyd was the least imitated, because no one else could quite replicate what he did. And when he left SNL after the 1978-79 season, he didn't fade, he accelerated. In 1980, The Blues Brothers hit theaters, co-written by Aykroyd and director John Landis. It was ambitious, chaotic, and unlike anything audiences had seen before, a sprawling comedy packed with high-speed car chases and electrifying live performances from icons like Aretha Franklin, Ray Charles, and James Brown. At its core was the barely contained, unpredictable energy that Aykroyd and Belushi had perfected together, now unleashed on a much larger stage. At the height of it all stood John Belushi, raw, electric, and unforgettable. The Blues Brothers quickly became a cult classic and, over time, secured its place as one of the most beloved comedy films ever made. And for Dan Aykroyd, the momentum didn't slow, it accelerated. In 1983, he starred alongside Eddie Murphy in Trading Places, directed by John Landis, a sharp, socially aware comedy about class and identity that remains strikingly relevant and genuinely funny decades later. Then came 1984, and everything changed again. Ghostbusters wasn't just another project, it was deeply personal. The original concept had been Aykroyd's from the start, developed over years and rooted in his lifelong fascination with the paranormal, an interest shaped in part by his family's connection to spiritualism, including his great-grandfather's correspondence with Arthur Conan Doyle. For Aykroyd, the idea of ghosts wasn't just fiction, it was something he had grown up believing might be real. His first version of the script was far more ambitious and chaotic than what audiences eventually saw, featuring elements like time travel and written with Belushi in mind for the role of Peter Venkman. But after Belushi's sudden death in March 1982, the project had to be reshaped. Bill Murray stepped into the role, Harold Ramis joined as co-writer, and Ivan Reitman took the helm as director. The result was something extraordinary, a film that earned nearly $300 million worldwide on a budget of about $30 million, cementing its place as a defining comedy of its era. Ghostbusters wasn't just a success, it was a full cultural phenomenon. It was funny, original, and instantly recognizable, right down to its iconic theme song. More importantly, it arrived at exactly the right moment. In the film, Dan Aykroyd played Dr. Ray Stantz, the true believer, the most enthusiastic member of the team, the one who seemed genuinely thrilled by every ghost, every theory, every strange possibility. There was something disarmingly honest about the performance. Because in many ways, Stantz wasn't just a character, he was Aykroyd. Or at least the most authentic version of him. The curious kid from Ottawa who had always believed there was more to the world than what you could see. That sincerity came through on screen, making the character feel real in a way that audiences connected with immediately. A sequel, Ghostbusters 2, followed in 1989. Though Aykroyd and his collaborators were reportedly hesitant to revisit the story, Columbia Pictures pushed forward, and the film still brought in an impressive $215 million worldwide. In between, and surrounding, those major peaks, the 1980s proved to be an incredibly strong decade for him. Films like Spies Like Us, Dragnet alongside Tom Hanks, and The Great Outdoors with John Candy kept him constantly in the spotlight. He was busy, reliable at the box office, and seemingly everywhere. But beneath that success, there was also loss. On March 5, 1982, John Belushi died of a drug overdose at the Chateau Marmont. He was just 33 years old, a devastating blow that cast a long shadow over everything that followed. Dan Aykroyd had, in some quiet way, sensed what was coming. In the years following Animal House and the Blues Brothers, John Belushi had risen to extraordinary fame, but his life had also become increasingly unstable, spiraling into something chaotic and dangerous. Still, knowing it could happen and actually living through it were two very different things. The two had been scheduled to present the Academy Award for visual effects together. Instead, Aykroyd stood on that stage alone. In a moment that was both restrained and deeply emotional, he said, "My partner would have loved to have been here to present this, given that he was something of a visual effect himself." It was a line delivered with perfect balance, humor layered over heartbreak, exactly the kind of thing that defined their partnership. The loss hit him hard. 4 years afterward, Aykroyd remained fiercely protective of Belushi's memory, refusing to let it be reshaped in ways he felt were unfair. He openly boycotted the 1989 biopic Wired, a film that many of Belushi's friends and family believed misrepresented who he truly was. Around this period, Aykroyd's personal life was also shifting. He had been briefly engaged to Carrie Fisher before eventually marrying Donna Dixon, marking the beginning of a new chapter, even as he carried the weight of the past with him. Dan Aykroyd once proposed to Carrie Fisher on the set of The Blues Brothers, where she appeared as the vengeful, jilted girlfriend of John Belushi's character. For a moment, it seemed like their story might last, but the engagement ended when Fisher reconciled with her former partner, musician Paul Simon. Not long after, on April 29, 1983, Aykroyd married Donna Dixon in an intimate ceremony on a friend's rooftop in Martha's Vineyard. Together, they built a family, raising 3 daughters, Danielle, who would later become known as the singer-songwriter Vera Sola, along with Belle and Stella. It was a period that seemed almost charmed. Success in film, success in music, and the sense that even more opportunities were just ahead. As one reflection put it, They were young, thriving, and stepping into something new, with momentum fully on their side. But then, in 1989, something unexpected happened, something that shifted how people saw him. If the 1980s had defined Aykroyd as a comedic force, Driving Miss Daisy revealed another dimension entirely. Cast as Bulai Worthen, he stepped into a quieter, more grounded role. The film, adapted from Alfred Urry's Pulitzer Prize-winning work, starred Jessica Tandy as the aging, strong-willed Daisy and Morgan Freeman as her patient chauffeur, Hoke. Aykroyd's performance as the devoted yet pragmatic son, caught between his mother's independence and the realities of responsibility, added a layer of restraint and depth that few had expected from him, quietly redefining what he was capable of on screen. Though his role in Driving Miss Daisy was limited in screen time, Dan Aykroyd delivered a performance that was subtle, warm, and deeply convincing. Some critics had initially questioned whether he belonged alongside actors of the caliber of Jessica Tandy and Morgan Freeman, but those doubts quickly faded. The film went on to win 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Actress for Tandy, Best Adapted Screenplay, and Best Makeup. At 80 years old, Tandy became the oldest winner of the Best Actress Award in history, a milestone that added even more weight to the film's legacy. At the 62nd Academy Awards in 1990, Aykroyd received a nomination for Best Supporting Actor. He didn't take home the Oscar. That honor went to Denzel Washington for Glory, but the nomination itself spoke volumes. Few had expected the man known for chasing ghosts and driving the Bluesmobile to appear in such a category. It was a quiet but powerful reminder that his range extended far beyond comedy, and even now, the performance remains one of the most overlooked achievements of his career. But the momentum didn't carry cleanly into the next decade. The 1990s proved to be far more difficult. There's no easy way to frame it. This was a challenging period. In 1991, Aykroyd made his directorial debut with Nothing But Trouble, a project that featured Demi Moore, Chevy Chase, John Candy, and Aykroyd himself, buried under heavy prosthetic makeup. The result, however, was a critical and commercial failure, strange, unsettling, and confusing to audiences. It didn't just miss the mark, it left many unsure of what they had just seen, marking a sharp and difficult turn in his career trajectory. In hindsight, Nothing But Trouble felt like the kind of project that happens when there's too much creative freedom and not enough restraint. Dan Aykroyd even received a nomination for a Razzie Award for Worst Supporting Actor, a harsh but telling response. It became a difficult lesson. Having a bold vision wasn't enough, it also had to connect. And unfortunately, what followed was a stretch of films that simply didn't land with audiences. Projects like Coneheads, Exit to Eden, often cited among the worst films of its decade, Canadian Bacon, Getting Away with Murder, and Blues Brothers 2000 struggled to find critical or commercial success. In particular, Blues Brothers 2000 attempted to revive something that, without John Belushi, proved impossible to fully recreate. His absence lingered in every scene. Despite a budget of around $28 million, the film brought in just over $14 million worldwide, underscoring how far things had shifted. You could look at this period and point to a series of missteps, a run of projects that didn't quite work. But there's another way to see it. Very few performers who reached the kind of peak Aykroyd did in the mid-1980s managed to stay there indefinitely. That moment wasn't just commercially successful, it was creatively rare. And perhaps what followed wasn't simply a decline, but the inevitable descent from a height that almost no one can sustain forever. By the 1990s, the landscape of Hollywood was shifting, and the window for that particular brand of star-driven, high-concept comedy was beginning to close. Dan Aykroyd wasn't alone in finding the decade more difficult, but he adapted by staying active wherever he could. On television, he maintained a steady presence, hosting the paranormal documentary series Sci-Factor, Chronicles of the Paranormal from 1996 to 2000, and starring in the ABC sitcom Soul Man, where he played a recently widowed Episcopal priest trying to rebuild his life. He also made recurring appearances on According to Jim, starring Jim Belushi, which ran from 2002 to 2009. None of these projects reached the cultural impact of his earlier work, but they reflected something just as important: consistency. He kept working, kept evolving, and never fully stepped out of the spotlight. Along the way, he delivered smaller but memorable supporting roles in films like Tommy Boy, Grosse Pointe Blank, and Ants. He stayed in motion, always contributing, always present. But the reality was becoming clear. The era of Aykroyd as a leading man in major studio comedies had largely come to an end. What remained, however, was something quieter but enduring, a respected presence, a collaborator, and, as those close to him often described, a genuinely good soul and trusted creative partner, someone whose instincts and perspectives still carried weight behind the scenes. What's easy to miss when looking only at Dan Aykroyd's film career is how much of his focus, starting in the early 1990s, shifted beyond Hollywood. In 1992, he co-founded House of Blues alongside Isaac Tigret and Judith Belushi Pisano. The first location opened in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but the idea quickly expanded into a nationwide presence. It wasn't just a business, it was a reflection of Aykroyd's lifelong passions. The concept blended live music, Southern-inspired cuisine, and a deep respect for blues culture, elements that traced directly back to his early experiences listening to music in Ottawa clubs. It was something personal, something rooted in who he had always been. Over time, the brand grew into a major entertainment enterprise, and in 2006, it was sold to Live Nation Entertainment for a reported $350 million, marking a major success outside of film. But he didn't stop there. In the mid-2000s, Aykroyd expanded into the spirits industry, starting in a relatively low-key way. He became the Canadian importing agent for Patron Tequila, helping it rise to become the top-selling premium tequila in the country. That experience gave him more than just business success. It gave him a foothold in an entirely new industry, proving once again that his instincts extended well beyond the screen. In 2008, Dan Aykroyd partnered with artist John Alexander to launch Crystal Head Vodka, a product that stood out immediately for its bold identity. Packaged in a distinctive skull-shaped glass bottle inspired by the legend of the 13 crystal skulls, it wasn't just visually striking, it was crafted with precision. The vodka was additive-free, quadruple distilled, and filtered 7 times, with the final stages passing through Herkimer diamond crystals, giving it both a story and a sense of ritual. But what truly drove the brand was Aykroyd himself. He approached it with the same intensity he had brought to his creative work, hands-on, relentless, and deeply invested. By 2013, he was spending more than 90 days a year traveling for promotions. Dan Aykroyd has lived one of those lives that doesn't fit neatly into a single chapter. He made things that people still quote. He built things that still exist. He survived grief and missteps and the kind of career dips that finish some people off entirely. And he came back to a firehouse in New York City in a proton pack and reminded everyone why they loved him in the first place. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like. It goes a long way in helping the channel grow. And if you want more stories about the people who shaped the entertainment we grew up with, hit subscribe. There are a lot more of them where this one came.